There was a time in Britain when taking a spoon could cost your life. Not a chest of silver, not a violent robbery, a single household utensil. How did the law reach a point where property mattered more than a person? It's easy to laugh at the idea now. A spoon feels trivial, something you'd barely notice going missing. But that's because we live in a world flooded with manufactured goods, cheap materials, and mass production. For most of British history, a spoon was not disposable. It was a durable, reusable, and often made of materials that held real value. In poorer households, a spoon might be one of the few personal possessions you owned outright. In wealthier ones, it could be silver, literally currency you could eat with. To lose it wasn't just annoying, it felt like theft of stability. This matters because the law did not measure crimes by sentiment. It measured them by what they threatened. And in a deeply unequal society, property wasn't just property, it was power. So the question we need to ask isn't why a spoon, it's why the law treated property as sacred. By the 18th century, England's criminal law had become a strange, sprawling thing. Hundreds of offences carried the death penalty. Many involved property. Some involved objects so small that modern readers struggle to take them seriously. This wasn't an accident, it was strategy. There was no national police force, no CCTV, no welfare safety net. The state governed lightly and punished heavily. The idea was simple. If you could not catch every thief, you could frighten everyone else into obedience. Fear was cheaper than enforcement. And fear works best when the punishment feels wildly out of proportion. That's where our composite character enters our story. Not a thief, but a court clerk. Someone who records charges, reads indictments aloud, and ensures procedures are followed. He sees case after case pass across his desk. He knows which crimes carry death. He knows which ones can be quietly softened. He also knows that the law on paper is not designed to be kind. But if fear was meant to stop theft, why did the courts stay so busy? Historians later gave this system a name, the Bloody Code. But at the time, it didn't feel bloody, it felt orderly. The people writing the laws were landowners, merchants, aristocrats. Their wealth was tied to property, land, goods, tools, livestock. To them, theft wasn't desperation, it was rebellion in miniature. So the law responded accordingly. Steal from a house, capital offence. Steal from a shop, possibly capital. Steal something worth more than a set value, almost certainly. That value threshold mattered. It's why a silver spoon could become deadly. If the material value crossed a legal line, especially if it was silver, the charge escalated instantly. Our court clerk would have watched juries squirm at this point. They knew what the law demanded. They also knew what it would do. And that tension leads us to a critical question. When the law becomes too severe to enforce honestly, what happens next? Here's one of the great ironies of this period. The harshness of the law forced ordinary people to undermine it. Juries began to lie. They undervalued stolen goods. They reclassified items. They bent facts just enough to avoid the death sentence. A spoon becomes worth less than the threshold. A theft becomes borrowing. A charge is quietly reduced. Our court clerk records this without comment. The paperwork still looks proper. Justice appears to have been done. But beneath the surface, something extraordinary is happening. The public is rejecting the law, not through protest, but through procedure. Mercy becomes covert. Dishonesty becomes moral. And that should stop us in our tracks. If a legal system only functions when people cheat it, is it still legitimate? Despite these evasions, executions still happen. Publicly, loudly, intentionally. They are meant to teach. Crowds gather. Broadsheets are printed. The message is simple. This is what happens when you cross the line. The object doesn't matter, the principle does. And yet, the crowd response is unpredictable. Sometimes solemn, sometimes rowdy, sometimes sympathetic. People don't just watch, they interpret. Our court clerk, standing at the edge of this system, can't avoid noticing something unsettling. The punishment doesn't inspire respect. It inspires discomfort, even mockery. Fear, it turns out, has a shelf life. So what happens when the law's authority starts to decay in public? The retreat doesn't happen all at once. No dramatic repeal, no apology. Instead, Parliament trims and adjusts, removes a few capital offences here and there, raises thresholds, adds alternatives. By the early 19th century, something has shifted. Judges are more willing to recommend mercy. Transportation replaces execution. Prisons expand. Reformers argue cautiously that the punishment should fit the crime. And slowly the idea that someone could die for a spoon becomes embarrassing. Not immoral yet, just awkward. The distinction matters. Britain doesn't stop executing people because it suddenly becomes compassionate. It stops because the system looks absurd. And that leads us to a deeply modern realisation. Sometimes moral change begins not with empathy, but with discomfort. Out of this long, uneven process emerges a concept we now take for granted: proportionality. The punishment should reflect the harm done. The intent should matter. Circumstances should be considered. Today, this feels obvious. I say it out loud and you probably nod along. Of course, punishment should be proportionate. But that idea had to be invented. It replaced a world where law protected property above all else with one where harm to people began to count more. Our court clerk fades from view here. His role changes. His ledgers become less grim. The system he serves is no longer designed to terrify, but to manage. And yet the ghosts of that earlier system lingers. Because if the law once valued property over life, what does it still value too highly today? Before we move to the conclusion, I want to pause again to hear from you. When you hear that someone could once be executed for stealing a spoon, what strikes you the most? Is it the severity of the punishment or the calm certainty with which it was applied? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Not arguments, just reflections. This series works best when we think through it together. Now let's finish the story. This episode isn't about spoons. It's about how the law decides what matters. For centuries, Britain's legal system was built to defend property because property underpinned power. When that system began to wobble, it wasn't because of the poor suddenly gaining influence. It was because the system became too obviously out of step with everyday moral instincts. People stopped believing the punishment made sense. And once that belief cracks, everything else follows. So when we look back and ask, how could they think this was acceptable? The answer is uncomfortable, because it worked for those in charge until it didn't. Thanks for walking a little further down the road of history that made Britain. If you liked it, there's a button especially for that. If you subscribe, there's a whole back catalogue for you to enjoy. And if you ding the bell, you'll be informed of every new episode. Maybe something like this one that YouTube's chosen for you. Have a look, I think you'll like it. Until next time, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you very soon.